Hello everybody, welcome back to the Rugby Bunker. A bit of a disjointed week this week because of the England team announcement yesterday on Tuesday, so you're getting this episode slightly later than planned, dropping on a Wednesday instead of Tuesday, but I promise it's a good one because we've got some reaction from Pennyhill Park with myself and the Telegraph's Charles Richardson, just chatting about some of the elements of Steve Borthwick's selection to face Australia before bad light stop play. So I will then have a few extra points that I'll make after that. And then following that, you've got a conversation between myself and Christy Doran of The Raw, just giving us a bit of a perspective on the Wallabies after their busy year facing the British and Irish Lions. They just played Japan last weekend and now they've got 4 games jumping around Europe. So lots to get into. No podcast this week, but there will be a Friday YouTube episode, a bumper preview featuring myself and Sam Lana, whose analysis you know well after he popped up on a previous episode a few weeks ago. Let's cut to me and Charles sat by the pond at a very nice setting in Pennyhill Park. You might be able to hear a bit of bird song, a bit of the water rippling in the background. Yeah, hope you enjoy. Right, everybody, delighted to be joined on the Rugby Bunker in this very nice setting, Charles. Just in
salubrious, isn't it?
In the grounds of Pennyhill Park by Charles Richardson of the Telegraph. Hello.
Hello.
Look, the reason we're here at Pennyhill Park, Charles, is because England decided to name their team today, on Tuesday.
Da, da, da.
It was quite a fun team, wasn't it? It was quite spicy. If you were picking a top line out of the team, before we mention some of the stuff that's been discussed with Steve Borthwick and us, what did you like the most about the team?
What did I like most about the team was the fact that I think those Argentine, Steve Borthwick has placed a lot of cachet in those victories in Argentina. And I like the fact that the Lions guys who have come back in, who, had a very successful summer and some of them were outstanding on that tour of Australia, they are not just waltzing back in. And I think that is the right message to send. That is not me saying that I don't think they're good enough to start or even that their place in the starting 15 is up for grabs. If they were playing South Africa on Saturday, it might be a very different story. However, what I like is for squad harmony is Steve Borthwick saying, these guys have got the shirt from Argentina. They took real good care of it. They won 2 tests in Argentina. They also beat the US. Some of them, the guys who have retained the shirt, I'm thinking Finn Baxter, Joe Hayes, Guy Pepper, George Ford and Tom Roebuck in particular were some of the outstanding performers against the Pumas. And they're sticking, and I'm sticking with them. And I admire him for that. I admire him for that because it would have been so easy for him to just say, thanks guys, you came in, you did a great job for us, but back in your box, the big boys are back now.
Yeah, and it's created this interesting situation where the bench for England is pretty stacked, isn't it, with six Lions on there. The Tom Curry one is obviously a bit different because he had that wrist ligament surgery after the summer, and so he hasn't actually played a game yet this season. So they're going to work him off the bench. But the other guys, you're right, having Vin Smith on the bench. So fly half was one thing we wondered about coming in, and Steve was very clear about the fact that, George Ford has great leadership. He started the season in good form, and he played a really key role in Argentina as the fly half. So that's why Ford has started over Vin Smith.
I also think just almost by default, and nothing against Finn Smith at all, George Ford has just simply had more games to show his wares because Finn Smith nor Marcus were able to play until round 3 of the Premiership. Well, George already had 2 games before that to sort of get back match fit, get back in the swing of things and play well.
Yeah. And
the other two have been sort of playing catch up with that through no fault of their own. They're almost victims of their own success in a way in going on the Lions tour.
Yeah.
But I think, George Ford has gone, right, well, I've got more games of a run up at it and I'm gonna grasp the nettle.
And that was picked out by Borthwick as one of the tighter selection calls, trying to choose between Ford and the 2 Smiths. So there's no Marcus Smith in the 23. Ford fascinates me because I think all 3 of them, I don't think it's set in stone that Ford is going to be the fly half moving forward necessarily. But at the same time, do you want a bit of consistency now? I mean, Borthwick has spoken about, the World Cup is now the Lions tour is done. The focus is the World Cup, and that comes into the horizon. I just wonder, I think we've always thought that Finn Smith would just be installed and get loads of game time and would develop into this 10 with Ford sort of as the reserve kind of player coach in the background. And now I don't know.
I think my feeling is that to slightly twist the question a little bit, I can see Marcus Smith dropping away here as first choice fly half. I can see it. It was always a 3-way battle. I can see it becoming a 2-way battle with Marcus, as good as he is, having to settle with either a place at fullback or in that number 23 jersey. I think now it is a Ford Finn face-off for fly half, and I don't think necessarily, with how long Ford's been there and with Finn coming through, I don't think he has to say, I'm going with X or Y and I'm sticking with it no matter how they're playing, no matter the rest of the makeup of the team. It's not like Ford's my man, Finn's my man. He's always been, to his credit and sometimes to a fault, Steve Borthwick, he has always been somebody who would never, always trying to innovate. He would never rest on his, always thinking about selection, maybe sometimes overthinking it, but he would never just go, okay, that team played well then, so they're going to stay. So if he thought that that was the right selection for the opposition the following weekend, and it happened to be the same team, it happened to be the same fly half, then fine. He would never just go, great performance, lads, you're all playing next week. And he would never do that, I don't think, with a 10 either. It's not, you've got the jersey, so you're having it forever. I think there is some loyalty from Argentina, but that's because they played bloody well in Argentina, and they're playing bloody well now.
They are. Tommy Freeman at 13. Tommy Freeman at the Prem launch said quite openly that he wanted to play more at 13 for his club. He played at 13.
And he hasn't.
So he hasn't got his wish. So what we thought was quite a bold move, actually they've ignored that. He played at 13 against Wales at the back end of the Six Nations with Fraser Dingwall. And interestingly, England have gone back to that combination. Look, the strengths of having Freeman at 13 are obvious, right? He's 6'4", he's rapid, he carries incredibly well, he will get them over the gain line. What do you think? Is that long-term where he's best?
I mean, it does often come down to what the player wants, and the player wants to play 13. I'm sceptical. It's a very specialist position, and he is a world-class wing. So I just sort of think, why? Why bother?
Especially with Ollie Lawrence.
Especially with Ollie Lawrence.
Going quite well.
With Dingwall, Ollie Lawrence, Seb Atkinson, who I know he's not fit, but in the picture, Henry Slade, not selected. Especially that England do, with Finn Smith now trading at 12. With Ben Earl, with Steve Borthwick telling us at the press conference that Ben Earl
we're going to talk about that.
Is going to start a test at 12. I think just, is it necessary? With how fluid back divisions are now, and wings coming off their wing, is it necessary to have, I know the thought process. The thought process is that he thinks he has better back three options than centre options. So therefore, you can get Tommy into 13 while also picking a really good back three that's very balanced with Stuart, Fowler-Boso, Roebuck, and you've obviously got quite a few players missing there. Daly, Whiteholme, and others. And Arundel not even in the 23. I'm skeptical. I hope it works. I really do, and I'm not here saying that I want to say, hate to say I told you so if it doesn't work. I really do hope it works. I'm skeptical because positional changes at that level in rugby, permanent, are quite rare. And you look at wings that have gone to centre. George North, it seemed like a bit of a stopgap. Rico Ioane, I still think was better on the wing than he was at centre. I think there's a case that Elliot Daly was as well. And with Tommy Freeman, or was and is, should I say, and with Tommy Freeman, you just hope it's not a case of square peg round holes.
It normally happens later. You're talking about those kind of players.
When you lose a yard of pace.
It normally happens kind of late 20s, not when you're 24. I want to get onto the L stuff because there's a whole, that's in my quotes that we must talk about section. But Guy Pepper at blindside flanker, I think will be interesting. So obviously Curry isn't quite available or quite fit enough to start, which raises the question, we could have had Curry, Underhill and Ben Earl potentially as a starting back row if Curry was fit. That might have been interesting.
I think a genuine dark horse for that, Emeka Ilione of Leicester,
well, that's
I think
the other
at
thing.
number 8, I think that he is a big loss because they do not have, as he said, they do not have number 8s. With Tom Willis now, with them not selecting Tom Willis and leaving to Bordeaux, they are short of number 8. He has picked basically 3 7s.
He has. Borthwick said he likes Pepper's footwork and his carrying. He's added line-out jumping. He's a very good jackler. So you can see why he's gone from there. I think in that back row is very interesting. Nice to see Sam Underhill in there. There's a lot riding on Ben Earl's carrying. I think they're going to be really looking to Ben Earl to get them over the gain line. There's a huge importance on that. But then at the same time, do you have Henry Pollock on the bench? Do you have Alex Coles on the bench? Do you have Tom Curry on the bench? All these guys are there to bring real heft into. As Steve Borthwick kept bringing up, final quarters, they've been an issue for England. This is something that they're trying to solve by almost reversing the team. Okay, so some of the stuff that Charles and I weren't able to get into before bad light stopped play as we were sat in the increasingly dark setting at Penny Hill Park, I now want to just dive into quickly on my own while I'm here. So we didn't get a chance to chat about Guy Pepper, but Guy Pepper came out of the Argentina tour with an incredibly high, glowing report, basically, from everybody there in terms of how well he played in Argentina. I think everybody's so impressed by his jackling, obviously, but Borthwick also spoke about two things that he really liked about Guy Pepper. He really likes his, as I glance over at my notes, the fact that he's really added line-out jumping into his game, which I think is going to be a big factor for England against the Wallabies. But also he likes the way Pepper kind of uses his feet when he goes into contact work, so how good he is with his footwork, how he's able to kind of glide past the first defender and the first man. So that's something to look out for against the Wallabies. Borthwick last week said something similar about Emeka Ilione and how impressive he was with how Ilione kind of carries into contact and how he uses his body in those situations. And I think there's a real... that ties into kind of the core emphasis of something that I wanted to address with a quote from Steve Borthwick yesterday about England's approach, really. He was very honest about the fact that this England team is not huge. It's not a huge team. That's how he essentially put it. He said, we're not a team with huge size, but we are a team that can run. And so I think what you're seeing from England at the moment, and I don't know whether this is just because of George Martin being unavailable, but I think Steve Borthwick is... looked at the players he has. He's always been very pragmatic with his selections and his coaching. That's nothing new. But I think he's decided that this is a team that can play at pace. This is the team that can work hard. This is a team that can have exceptionally high fitness levels. And this is a team, as he said, that can run. And so I think that's why you've got this very mobile back row with Pepper and Underhill and Earl. I think it's why you've moved Freeman into the midfield to use his pace there, to then add another winger out wide with Roebuck. I think what England want to do, if possible, is try and play fast, try and move the ball, try and attack the wings, to try and entertain. As slightly cringeworthy as that sounds, I think that's kind of in their remit. They've appreciated that they can't beat teams the way that South Africa do. They haven't got the power in reserve. They haven't got the kind of bludgeoning capability there. So what do they want to do? They want to try and beat teams with their pace. In theory, it's very interesting. Fast and aggressive. That was the word that came out of yesterday. It's a completely different England to the one we saw at the World Cup. And the reason for that is, as Borthwick has said a number of times now, that whole game plan for the World Cup was built around a process of how can we approach this World Cup in a short space of time, play to our strengths with a limited game plan. And look how well it worked out. They did pretty well. Now what you've got is a team that wants to play quick. Now, fitting into that, Charles and I sort of teased it there, but we didn't get a chance to discuss it further, is this idea of forwards playing in the back. So we obviously know about Ben Earl at centre is something we've seen at glimpses in games. Borthwick said that a Ben Earl start at inside centre is very possible. Now, the game where it makes sense to do that is Fiji next week, as opposed to in the Six Nations. So if we do get Ben Earl at centre next week, that will be fascinating. And I genuinely do hope we get to see it, because England clearly have seen enough in training to feel confident that he can do a job there. Two other players have been training in the backs. Pepper is one of them, training in the centre. Again, I think for players like Pepper breaking into the team, the more versatility you can have, if England feel that you can cover those positions, fantastic. And the final one is Henry Pollock on the wing. So Pollock, as Borthwick said, believes he's got the pace to match most wingers at test level. I've spoken to other people around the England squad who say the same thing, that, you know, he's got that kind of speed. He can match most wingers. Is there a possibility that we get an England backline with Earl at inside centre and Pollock on the wing to finish a test match? Yeah, it sounds like these are tangible things. I think it's not just kind of a worst case scenario situation. I think it's England genuinely trying to prepare for all outcomes in games and to also make the most of the athleticism that they have in their team. And it fits this new ethos of that they've been building this year through the Argentina tour, now going into the autumn of playing with pace. And that's linked to Lee Blackett's appointment as attack coach. There's lots to unpack there. I'm just checking my notes to see that I haven't missed anything else. I know we've spoken a lot about George Ford, and just one final point that Borthwick made on Ford, which I think you'll find interesting, is that Ford is now the starting 10. I think it was a tight call at fly half between the three of them, or at least Borthwick made out that it was. But I think Ford's form is a big factor. But more interestingly, when Borthwick was talking about the non-selected players, he said that the non-selected players were brilliant in training in the final training session, putting them through their paces, and also that Ford, don't forget, was out of the England team for a long time in terms of he trained a lot, he was in camp a lot, but he wasn't getting picked. And Borthwick noted that Ford, during that spell, was the best trainer out of all of the players. He trained harder than any of the players. He gave everything in every single training session. That's what Borthwick wants to see from his players, that Ford sets the tone. Shameless plug, if you haven't read my interview with Ford in The Observer from last week, where we nerded out about drop goals, and he was recalling Johnny Wilkinson's prowess at the 2007 World Cup, not just 2003, where Ford got to watch Wilkinson up close because his dad, Mike, was England's defence coach at the time. So Ford was at the games and he was watching Wilkinson kind of dominate these fixtures with his kicking game, especially the semi-final against France. If you haven't had a chance to read that yet, then I'll pop a link in the description, and it would be much appreciated. But yeah, I think that's everything from Penny Hill, which I've covered with Charles and I've now covered on my own. So next up, we have a conversation with Christy Doran. Christy writes for The Raw, excellent journalist in Australia, really clued in with the Wallabies, great sources, great intel, has followed them closely. And yeah, I wanted to pick his brain about a few thoughts with Australia's selection and just how they're tracking heading up to the end of the year. So enjoy. Right, delighted to be joined on the Rugby Bunker by Christy Doran of The Raw. How are you, my friend?
Ben Coles, it's so good to see you, and great job with this, the platform, and it's awesome. I can't believe it's been so long. You've been doing this for a while, and it's my first introduction.
Well, I was just saving you for, the big moment, and obviously with Australia in town, when better to have a conversation with you. What a year, mate, for the Wallabies. How would you sum up where they are off the back of the Rugby Championship coming into this autumn schedule?
It's fascinating, Ben, because the Wallabies are 5 wins from 11 matches, so it's less than 50%. But if you were to ask an Australian rugby fan where the Wallabies are at the moment, they'd be thinking, geez, we're back. And that's what many of the headlines have been over the last couple of months. When you push the Lions in the second test, you beat the Lions in the third test, then you go to Ellis Park where you haven't won in 63 years, and you beat them. And then, there's just been this wave of momentum over the last few months around the Wallabies, this resurgence under Joe Schmidt. But if you put it in real terms, 5 from 11 isn't actually that fantastic. The Wallabies just scraped home against Japan last week in Tokyo. And before that, they lost back-to-back test matches to New Zealand, a defeat to Argentina and Sydney, which was quite an ugly loss as well. So they have made progress from where they were, but they're probably back to where they might have been in 2022, where they were pushing some of the bigger powers, but they're not necessarily a power themselves.
It feels like a fascinating schedule, and obviously I think for followers of the game in England, that kind of incredible finish to last year's England-Australia game will still be fresh in their minds. I wonder what you make of the way England have set up in terms of kind of putting a lot of strength on their bench. You got 6 Lions on the bench. You got realistically the kind of starting front row on the bench as well, with Cowan Dickey and Ellis Skenge and Will Stewart. What do you make of that approach from England to kind of almost backloading their team in a way?
It's a really fascinating squad. I like it, and I know that there's been a few people that have gone, Freddie Stewart, he's not that quick at the back, but he's so good under the high ball, isn't he? George Ford at 10. There's an embarrassment of riches in the number 10 jersey for England. The fact that Owen Farrell's not in the squad, the fact that Marcus Smith is not even in the match day 23. From an Australian perspective, we're thinking about a guy called Tane Edmund, who's had 4 test starts. He's played about 6 matches. He was dropped earlier in the year, wasn't even in the match day 23 for the Waratahs. And we're thinking he's now playing number 10 for the Wallabies at Twickenham. Where's James O'Connor? Well, he's going to be doing corporate box stuff on Saturday for the Twickenham game. Where's Tom Liner, who was playing against the Lions, and he's going to probably be with his old man, but he's been around Richmond in recent days. Where's Ben Donaldson, who was on the bench for all 3 tests? Well, he wasn't considered good enough, and he's gone down the pecking order at a rapid rate of knots over the last couple of months. So it's a really fascinating thing where I think about the Wallabies and where England's at. And I look at England, and I look at the team, and I go, it's well balanced. It's got a general there at 10. There's going to be an aerial raid, and they'll be looking at what happened last week. And Andrew Kellaway is not the safest under the high ball. They're going to likely have Harry Potter come in. And then you think about not just the aerial raid, but the attack on the ground. And you think about the Sam Underhill who's back at 7. You think about Ben Earl who's at 8. You think about Tom Curry, who was so brilliant during the Lions series, who's going to be coming off the bench. And similarly, the youth, the exuberance, the quality of a Henry Pollock who will pick up the game speed and the tempo. And I go, there's a lot here for England. It's whether or not they can come together in the course of 4 training sessions, which is what Steve Borthwick spoke about on Tuesday. So the Wallabies have had 4 months. England's had 4 sessions, but I do like the look of what England, I think their pack is good, and I like what they're going to do in terms of the 6 lines off the bench because, you know, one-day cricket games, 2020 cricket games is often how you finish the match, which is most important these days in games of rugby union. If you're thereabouts, it's how you can finish over the top of the opposition in the last 20 minutes. We saw it with the Springboks in only the last couple of months. We saw it at the Box in the 2019 World Cup final. Blew England away in that last 20, 30 minutes. And really, since we go back to the Michael Cheika years of 2015 with the introduction of the so-called finishers, they are the ones who are now finishing test matches. So when I look at the England team, I go, it is a good-looking side. It's a 6-2 bench, and it can cover multiple positions across the line. And the fact that Marcus Smith, who I think was probably the best 10 in world rugby last year, is not even in the matchday 23. There's an embarrassing amount of riches.
That's so interesting. It's great to get a kind of outside perspective on a player like Marcus, because I think there is a sense now here that he is essentially third in the pecking order, and he will be used when he is used in kind of like a gadget role, either as a fullback or as cover for 10. But his stock is clearly so high. So you're right about the difference in prep time. We've heard last week when England had their mini camp. We've heard it this week around the team announcement. I think it was even in the official press release, a line from Steve Borthwick noting the difference in prep time between Australia having 11 tests or whatever it is and England having 4 sessions. And I'm not saying that they're getting an excuse out there early, but it is interesting how hard they've leaned on that narrative. I want to come back to Tane Edmed. I want to know, firstly, a bit more about him. But also, secondly, say you had every single fly half option available, but like not injured or kind of not because of release issues. Who is the best option for Australia at fly half at the moment? Maybe start with a bit about Edmed's background and then tell me your answer.
I'm going to go to the answer straight away. The best option is a guy they've just brought back, and that's Carter Gordon. He was there in France, of course, and at the time he was 22. He played less than 5 caps for Australia, and he dropped 1 high ball, and he dropped 1 ball at the line against Fiji. And all of a sudden, the Wallabies were on the back foot without, Will Skelton, no Taniela Tupou, no Tate McDermott, who were injured and got injured over the previous 7 days. And after that, he kind of got thrown under the bus a little bit. He was dropped to the bench against Wales. Ben Donaldson came in, and then the Wallabies lost by 1,000 points. And obviously it's a hyperbole, but they got absolutely embarrassed in Lyon. And then all of a sudden, the Melbourne Rebels, who Carter Gordon was playing for, had financial issues. They fell under. They lost their license to operate. And with a new Joe Schmidt, who didn't necessarily know all that much about Carter Gordon, who had seen a little bit of him play, probably didn't put the arm around him that he needed to. And he decided, you know what, I'm just going to go. I'm going to go to the NRL. And over the last couple of months, and then probably the last 6 to 12 months, Rugby Australia's worked out that was the wrong decision, that they should have fought harder to get him back, and they have. And they were probably fortunate to get them back. They paid $100,000 to the Gold Coast Titans. He is back, but unfortunately he's got a quad injury. He picked it up in the couple of days leading up to the Japan game last week. There's precious few details around that. You look at the highlights on the Instagrams of the Wallabies at the moment. You can see Carter Gordon, who's jumping up to catch a high ball. But my understanding is that he's not 100% fit yet. He might come back against Italy. He is definitely the best 10 in Australia. He will be by the 27 World Cup, and he certainly will be in the next month or two and by next year's Super Rugby season, where he's returned to his home state of Queensland and he'll play for the Reds. There's several options in Australian rugby of guys that can wear the number 10 jersey, but pretty much since I would say Bernard Foley in 2015, there's not been a guy who can command a team around the park, and that's from Super Rugby to the national level. There's guys along the way, the Christian Lealifanos, the Matt Timurs, the Quade Coopers, the Bernard Follers, that had ebbs and flows in their form, and clearly now they're all in their mid-30s, and pretty much James O'Connor included. Joe Schmidt has decided we really desperately need to look at the younger generation, because who knows if James O'Connor, who's the most recent person to really wear the 10 jersey, is going to be there come the 2027 World Cup. As a result, he's invested time in other younger 10s, the Noah Lolosios, the Ben Donaldsons, most recently Tom Liner and Tane Edmond, and none of them have really taken the opportunity. So they've all had between probably 5 and 25 caps. Ololosio had that horrific injury not that long ago against Fiji. He'd already signed to Japan, and he had already signed to go to a Japanese club because he didn't have the love from Rugby Australia. They weren't prepared to pay him more than $500,000 a year, Australian dollars, because they didn't necessarily think he was the person to take him through to the World Cup. So there's all these guys, and even though it invested a lot of time in him, they didn't think he was that great. So where does it stand, the pecking order? Carter Gordon, number 1, and then there's a big cloud hovering over 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and where they might end up. Tane Edmond, though, is a 24-year-old who, as I said beforehand, was dropped to club rugby before. He wasn't necessarily in the Australia junior Wallabies side. He didn't come through the traditional pathways, but he's a goer, he's a fighter. He's not going to throw the toys out of the cot. And it's not quite a Stephen Bradbury case of last man standing, but Joe Schmidt's seen a bit about him that he likes, and it's the courageous aspect of his fight. He's not a small bloke necessarily. He'll make his tackles more often than not, but he needs to learn how to control a team, how to lead a side to a victory, how to slot the last minute goal. And he's missed a few of those goals over the last 3 years for the Waratahs. He's just signed with the Brumbies because Dan McKellar, the new Waratahs coach, didn't necessarily think he could command a team around, boss that side around like a George Ford can. So he's got a bit about him, and he'll wear the 10 jersey against England. But there's so many people that go, well, what's his actual real strength here? Because at the moment, it's hard to know. Like, he does a bit of everything, jack of all trades, but Australian rugby audiences are yet to see what a Tane Edmond can do. And maybe it's just time. We've got to remember he's 24, and hopefully in 2 or 3 years' time, particularly come the World Cup, that he's knocking on the door, and there's 2 or 3 great options for the Wallabies.
Hey, listen, maybe it's Saturday at Allianz Stadium. Maybe that's the moment. How do you feel about the Wallabies slate of games as a whole? So you've got England, Italy, Ireland, France, I think in that order, if I'm correct.
You bang on.
In terms of chance for a bit of revenge against Italy, I guess from 3 years ago in Florence, which was kind of the almost like the dog days of the Dave Rennie era, wasn't it? Sort of the back end of 2022. Yeah, how do you feel about the slate of games and their prospects?
Well, I was covering the Wallabies in 2022, and that was the nail in the coffin for Dave Rennie. I was at Ireland in Dublin, and I was sitting next to Tom Decent there, a guy that you know and probably English audiences do too. They were just a couple of points short. It was a rolling maul that Jake Gordon got penalised. And had they won that game in Ireland, Dave Rennie probably would have kept his job. He didn't. They beat Wales despite being 2 or 3 tries behind by the 60-minute mark, and they managed to salvage a win. So, yes, there is redemption certainly on the cards for the Wallabies in Italy. How do they go? It's a 5-match tour for the Wallabies. It's a marathon 15-test series. It's like watching India play cricket, where everyone wants a bit of India because of all the money. And the Wallabies have chased the money by taking up 5 end-of-year tour matches. Of course, they're not going to be with all their players for this coming game against England, like the John Eales medalist Len Ikitau, because it's outside the international window. Tom Hooper, another person. So they're up against it. But what they're 1 from 1. And if they can get 3 from 5, it will be 60% that they win on this tour. Now, the Wallabies have won at 41% since 2016. So that's a terrible record, 41% over the last 10 years. So since that World Cup final in 2015. So 2 wins would be 40%, which would be actually where the Wallabies have been at the last 10 years. So can they get to 3? That's the really big question. And a lot comes down to this game against England, I think, because Ireland have the benefit of New Zealand this weekend, followed by hosting Japan, where they'll be able to rest a couple of guys and get themselves totally fine-tuned for a Wallabies into a Springboks game. So that's a harder schedule for the Wallabies, I think. France to finish off the marathon season. So England is imperative. If they're to have 3 out of 5 wins, which would be very much a reasonable result, not an outstanding result, but where the 7th ranked Wallabies are, they need to beat England here at the Allianz Twickenham Arena on Saturday. Will they? I'm not sure. I think England, there's some good players in form. The Wallabies are going to have to find another emotional high because they've had the Lions. They've gone to South Africa a week later and beaten them at Ellis Park. They've lost the Bledisloe, and their form's just started to taper off over the last month. And that's not surprising for a side that probably doesn't have the squad depth of South Africa, New Zealand, maybe even England. It's fascinating. I think the bench gives England a slight advantage here. No Tate McDermott is a big blow for the Wallabies. I like Ryan Lonergan. He's a really good young player. He's not even that young now. He's probably 27, but he's only had 2 matches. He wasn't even brought off the bench against Japan because Joe Schmidt didn't have the trust and confidence. He wanted Jake Gordon to see out the 80 minutes, which he did, and he led the Wallabies to victory. But the Wallabies probably don't have the same punch off the bench that they did this time last year when guys like Jorgensen scored in the corner. Donaldson had played a really good hand at the end. Langy Gleeson played well. Joseph Kusiswali caught everyone by surprise, even though he had big raps as a rugby league player. To do what he did on his test debut was simply incredible. So I think if they can come away with a win, well, bravo, and you'll tip your hat, but they're up against it.
Oh, listen, Christy, what an absolute pleasure. I was going to say Lennick and Tom Hooper have settled in very well at Exeter, as will shock nobody given their pedigree. But listen, we wait and see what happens on Saturday, mate. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Ben, great to join you, and all the best. Can't wait to do it again soon.
Oh, you'll be back. Don't worry. Cheers, mate. Right, everybody. Appreciate that's a bit of a bumper episode, but hopefully that gives you plenty to chew on heading into the game. I'll be back on Friday with Sam Lana to go through each of the home nations to chat about their kind of prospects, as well as France and Italy. But yeah, the Quilter Nations series is upon us. It's going to be an incredibly busy month. Please subscribe. Please share. Please let people know what we're doing. Keep an eye out for us on all your social media as well, especially on TikTok. And yeah, lots to come. Chat in the next few days.